Previously, on Engineering the Jigsaw, we talked about how LLMs work in some basic ways and what an LLM is in episode F26. Then in F27, we talked about how a large language model might be used using agents, workflows, and structured context, and actually what context is, using technologies such as MCP, Model Context Protocol, and RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. This means we've talked a lot about the potential. However, we've not yet talked about applying judgment in how an LLM should be used. So, how should an LLM be used? Let's go find out. Hi everybody, I'm Ian Cunningham from VectorGB. Welcome to this foundation level episode of Engineering the Jigsaw, foundation episode number 28, or how should we use a large language model, or LLM for short. In F26, we described how a language model is a piece of software that has learned patterns from large amounts of text. And we highlighted that a useful summary of what they do is that language models, such as LLMs, predict how text probably continues. Now, when we talk about text here, we made a distinction, which is structured text. And I should clarify that structured text can include things like descriptions of pictures. So we can generate pictures out of LLMs, or images, I should say. Audio also can be generated from an LLM because you can represent that as text. There's lots of different things you can do. It's not just necessarily the written word that we talk about when we talk about text. Important to remember. Now, large in an LLM refers to the size of the model and its training data, the internal model parameters, that is. So to repeat, the large in LLM refers purely to scale. It doesn't mean clever, it doesn't mean correct, and it does not mean reliable. We are talking about statistical engines. And in F27, we covered a lot of terms that you might hear in an engineering context in relation to LLMs. Terms such as agents and workflows and agentic workflows, context, model context protocol, retrieval augmented generation. And these all relate to how you might use an LLM beyond a single chat prompt. And while that's great to know, what do we do next? Well, let's move on to how we should use an LLM. So in this final episode of our trilogy on large language models, we're going to move on from how might to how should. And this is a very different kind of question to those we usually ask in Engineering the Jigsaw. We're not going to talk about policy, standards, or regulations. We're not going to talk about tools, technologies, or architectures. Instead, we're going to talk about responsibility, oversight, and appropriate use. And that is because how might is really a fundamentally different kind of question to how should. They're really not the same. So we'll also clarify that question before we go in to the kinds of tasks that LLMs are suited to and why, so where we should use them. We'll also cover where LLMs are not suitable, even if they appear capable, and we'll make it clear where responsibility must remain in any LLM-enabled system. And it's really important to kind of make it clear that large language models are really good at working with language. They can generate, they can summarize, explain, and relate text. And that fluency often feels very authoritative or confident. You really get a feeling that the LLM knows what it's talking about because of the kind of language it uses. However, fluency, language skill, is not understanding. And it's also not judgment. So this gets us to this idea about the difference between might and should, and why we need to be explicit about this difference. How might we use an LLM is about what is kind of feasible and possible and how systems might be structured. Meanwhile, how should we use an LLM is about what is appropriate and where judgment needs to be applied. And possibility and appropriateness are not the same. So, where do LLMs fit well? Well, language-centric tasks, especially language-centric tasks where ambiguity is acceptable, outputs can be reviewed, and errors are recoverable. Remember, LLMs are statistical engines. They just generate content based on patterns. There's no guarantee that what they're actually saying is correct. And if you look on the internet, there's stories you'll find about LLMs that have made up citations in court cases that kind of argue about the number of letters that appear in a phrase with the person who's telling them how many letters there are. And it's very authoritatively saying, no, the word intelligent has 5 Zs in it. This kind of nonsense. It's obviously not clue. But what they learned is a pattern. They're repeating a pattern that some word has some number of letters in, and it's inserting kind of things into the blanks there. It doesn't understand counting to be able to actually count letters. What it's doing is it's filling the pattern, and what's the most likely number that comes in? Well, it's 5, so we'll put 5 into that pattern, for example. So where we have reviewable language-centric tasks, LLMs can support human reasoning, and of course, this means that a human remains the decision maker. Where, though, aren't LLMs suitable? Where do they not fit? Well, it's kind of the opposite of what we just talked about. So anywhere where you have an output that is final and irreversible, anywhere where safety is directly at stake, or where accountability cannot remain with a human. And that's not because LLMs are flawed. It's because LLMs do not have any understanding of consequences, risk, or intent. So while they're great at supporting decisions and decision making, LLMs are not able to take responsibility for them when we have any kind of irreversible or safety critical decision. In fact, a common misunderstanding is to anthropomorphize and say that an LLM has made a decision. In reality, an LLM simply generates content according to probabilities based on patterns. And it doesn't matter if that content is text, audio, or images. It is just a pattern-based prediction mechanism. Humans need to decide how to act on that content and what to do with it. So really, unless you want to live as the dice man, responsibility cannot be delegated to a statistical system. So if we think about how in F26, we talked about how LLMs are a power tool for working with text. And we used the example of the chainsaw. Well, power tools amplify your capability, but they don't remove responsibility. Used well, they increase effectiveness. Used poorly, they increase risk. They are an amplifier. So just as a chainsaw accelerates a lumberjack's work when felling trees, the chainsaw does not replace the lumberjack's skill or judgment in how to do that safely and appropriately. And humans need to remain accountable. And we introduced this concept in F27 when we introduced the ideas of human in the loop and human on the loop, because the underlying message there was accountability. And oversight is not optional in most engineering tasks. Whether a human reviews every step or supervises the process as a whole, responsibility remains with the human. It is really a requirement of appropriate use of an LLM that a human oversight capability is retained in your system architecture. As a summary, In this episode, we moved on from what an LLM is and how one might be used, how one should be used, because fluency is not understanding. LLMs are great tools for supporting human reasoning, but they cannot make decisions. And this means that they're unsuited to use when outputs are irreversible or safety is at stake. And this means that human judgment and skill is essential in appropriate application of LLMs in an engineering environment, whether human in the loop, HITL, or human on the loop, HOTL. That's everything we're going to talk about today. Watch out for upcoming special editions that explain how Vector is enabling its products with AI. Make sure to join me after the music if you want to get in touch in the meantime. Really hope you've enjoyed this episode of Engineering the Jigsaw. Make sure if you have, you give it a thumbs up in YouTube. If you have questions or ideas, then give us a comment down below the video. If you don't want to do it in public, if you want to keep it private, then drop us an email to our special email address, engineering.jigsaw@vector.com. You can find a link to our webpage with those contact details on in the description for this video. Make sure that you subscribe to get notified as we release new episodes and as Vector publishes its excellent and informative videos on its YouTube channel. Make sure to check out our playlists. We have our foundation episodes playlist and also intermediate level playlist as well, you to binge and catch up with. We'll catch you for another episode soon. Goodbye.